Welcome to this lesson. In this video, I will talk about all materials that you need for painting with acrylics. To start, you will need acrylic brushes. It's always good to have some small and some big brushes. You can choose to paint with flat or round. Flat ones are very good for filling an area evenly, for example, and round brushes are very good for controlling lines and shapes. It's also good to have some small brushes to paint details, but it's not always necessary. It depends a lot on the work you are going to paint and the size of your canvas or paper. A pencil is always handy to draw before starting to paint. To paint with acrylics, you can always choose between canvas and paper. Normally, the canvas is more textured. In this aspect, it is different from paper. The paper must be specific for acrylic painting technique. Sometimes you can find paper that works for both oil and acrylic. It's also very good, especially if you decide to combine the two techniques. Another important material is the palette. It is very useful for mixing colors. A container with water to mix the colors and clean the brushes, and a paper tissue for cleaning and drying the brushes. And of course, you will need acrylic paints. Carbon paper is also a useful material. If you don't like to draw, or if you want to focus more on the painting part, you can transfer any image with this paper. Paper tape or any glue tape is good for fixing the carbon paper to the canvas or other surface. It is always useful to have. Now let's see how acrylics works. Start by putting a small amount of paint on your palette and close always the container because the paint can dry. Dip the brush in water and mix well with the paint. If you don't want a transparent consistency, don't mix too much water. Remove excess paint from the brush on the paper tissue to control better the brush strokes. If the acrylic is still wet, you can smooth the stain. In another direction, it's the same thing. When you feel that the acrylic is dry on the paper, let it dry first and then paint a second layer. If the acrylic on the palette is drying too, add more water. Before you change color, clean always the brush well. You can always see this symbol on the tubes. This means transparent. The first color we used was opaque. With transparent pigments, to get the opaque area, you need 2 or 3 layers, and before painting over a layer, the previous one must be dry. Here you can see that the consistency is not the same as the first color, it's more transparent. Here you can see that the square is completely black. This means that the pigment is opaque. Now let's try a semi-transparent color. Some brands don't have this symbol, but when you find a more transparent pigment, it's normal. So, this is the semi-transparent, this is the transparent, and this is the opaque one. To make lines, use a smaller round brush, and to obtain a more fluid paint, mix more water, but not in excess, to not change the consistency of the paint too much. Before starting an illustration, try to do these exercises to understand the acrylic properties better. So, these are some of the materials that you need for painting with acrylics. You don't need to have all the colors. Sometimes it's enough to have only the primary colors like yellow, magenta, blue, and neutral colors like black and white. You can make almost any color just by mixing these colors.